But once she started taking this Genesis drops, it was like a transformation. By the Wednesday night, she's done with all her homework. And I didn't have to fight with her. How does Genesis actually do that?
With the ADHD mind, there's a lot of stuff around not wanting to begin things, aversion to finishing, getting distracted in the middle. The four that I identified very strongly were starting tasks, right? Because ADHD people have a lot of difficulty beginning the task in the first place. Maintaining focus on the task while doing the task, and then getting to completion without distraction, right? What we're dealing with is poor focus, poor concentration, poor task initiation, poor completion. So if any of these things are problematic, then Genesis will benefit you.
Greetings, seekers of ancient wisdom. And we're back today with Dr. Adam Suzman, the founder of Beyond Medicine. So, Dr. Suzman, welcome to the show. And how are you doing today?
Fantastic, Deepak. How are you?
I'm doing so well. End of the year is coming up. And I wanted to talk about this amazing trial that I joined. Myself and my daughter actually joined it. It was a trial for ADHD and clarity and focus. And your remedy is called Genesis. That's the one. Nice little golden yellow bottle. My daughter's become very familiar with that, over the time. So I just wanted to tell you why I joined the trial, and you can tell, then you can jump into it. So my daughter's 8 years old. She's in grade 2, and she gets homework. At this stage, she gets homework at the beginning of the week on a Monday, and then she has till the Friday to finish her homework. So throughout the year, we've been struggling with my daughter to get her to do her homework. And regularly, the Thursday night is drama and panic. She hasn't done her homework. Now there's too much to do. There's this like unknown project you have to do as well, or an oral presentation or something. And Thursday nights just became panic stations. But once she started taking this Genesis drops, it was like a transformation. By the Wednesday night, she's done with all her homework. And I didn't have to fight with her. I didn't have to push her. I didn't have to, bribe her or anything. It was like she just did it. And by Wednesday, she's done. And there was no drama. And she just like really excelled at her work. Projects were on time. Presentations were on time. She was, it was like a huge transformation. So how does Genesis actually do that? And then we can jump into the trial results.
Yeah, well, fantastic to hear. I mean, as a parent, my daughter's 13, so I get how that traumatic that is for all parties concerned, the children, the parents, the tension, the agitation, the like last minute stuff, and just the kind of frenzy that it generates. And when speaking to a lot of the ADHD people, this is what they told me, that their pattern was they would only do things when this incredible flight fright sort of terror space was there, and that the fear would get them to crunch down and do it, but under tremendous pressure and like adrenaline, cortisol pumping through the system. And I looked at it as a model of how to run your body, and it was just like, wow, that's the way not to do it. But it seemed like with the ADHD mind, there's a lot of stuff around not wanting to begin things, aversion to finishing, getting distracted in the middle. It's like all parts of the beginning, middle, end story around completion of tasks were impacted. So I mean, I didn't realize how bad the ADHD mind can get. I mean, we had some pretty extreme cases, and until I actually started doing this trial with the people, and a lot of people's mind space came out. I think a lot of people found the trial quite, it was just quite therapeutic, because they could talk about, their experience of themselves and like what it felt like to have this kind of I think it's classified as a neurodivergence, but then most things are, where the brain just really required almost like, you have to beat the buffalo to get it to go out to pasture, and that was their mind. But they could only do this right at the end, and then all these panic stations, and it's almost like putting yourself in a life death scenario just to finish your homework, and they would almost procrastinate to the point where this became a necessity, and then it became a habit, and so they would be forced to play this crazy game with themselves, where they would treat themselves like stubborn oxen, and that they would have to, prod the mind to the point of terror, at this point to get it done. So that's what I was working with, Now when you look at the components, I decided to go right back to basics with this, to like take the whole thing to pieces and not go the normal routes of like the Ritalins and the Vivances and whatever, or even some of the neurochemicals like the L-theanine, those kind of things, just to work on a purely, yeah. So I mean, this is what I do. I break it down. I break down the components that need to be addressed, and then I build up from there. So the 4 or 5 components that are echoed each by a remedy in the remedy. Well, there's actually 6 components, right? But I mean, the 4 that I identified very strongly were starting tasks, right? Because ADHD people have a lot of difficulty beginning the task in the first place. Maintaining focus on the task while doing the task, and then getting to completion without distraction, right? So what the 4 elements of this remedy, I've been working a lot with the Norse runes, in conjunction with gold, different versions of gold, and the Norse runes are fascinating. Technologies. They are the verbs of the world. So there's the beginning, the ending, the completion, the becoming. There's the harvest. There's aspects of mind. So it's almost like these things have been distilled down as archetypal forms, and when they're mixed with these 3 versions of gold, I've got a liquid, solid, and then a burnt version of gold. We're able to give directives to basically the structure that runs the biochemistry. So the level beneath the biochemistry, a lot of Western medicine focuses on the biochemistry as they try to push the chemicals around, and like, okay, the serotonin, the dopamine, that's the level of intervention. But I thought if I could get the level beneath that and I could give an instruction there, then it would percolate up and the biochemistry would just follow suit. Like if you have a good blueprint, then when you build the house, it forms. But if you don't have a good blueprint or architectural design, the building's going to be haphazard, the bricks will be out of place, the walls will lean. So what I did was like more on the level of foundation, of structure, of blueprint, of planning. So this is where I came into this entire process, and I said, okay, well, to begin the process of beginning, an activity, I used the Fehu rune, which is around Freya, and this is about initiation. That state of almost like fertility, where you plant the seed in the ground. So it's like that germination seed of growth. So it's that initial. Freya was the goddess of battle and death. It's crazy mythology, but she was kind of the aspect that was brought in to initiate. So whenever the field was plowed and the grain was planted and there was watered, that initial springing up, we see this evidenced in spring, like after the winter when everything's kind of composted down, and then the rains come and then everything starts to grow. So it's like this raw energy of beginning a task. Because I was working with someone who was actually worked with the runes, and she was saying that was one of her biggest things, was like actually beginning the task. If she could get to that point of beginning, beyond the procrastination, then it was a lot easier. But often she couldn't even get to the beginning, where she felt the need to like burst forth into that activity, because a lot of the ADHD mindset is around distraction. In fact, most of it's around distraction, and it's not even Deliberate distraction, I mean, like doom scrolling was like one of the biggest culprits. But before we had doom scrolling, there was all these other things, fidgeting around or playing with us or looking at that or, feeding the dog or, all these things that would take the attention away from actually initiating the task in the first place. So that was the first piece. There's Fehurun, which is the initiation.
So, Dr. Suzman, sorry, I want to stop you there. So, how did you actually? I mean, you're saying it's a Norse mythological god, I guess, or entity, but how did you actually capture that energy into this bottle?
Okay, so I mean, with Beyond Medicine, my company, we work a lot or primarily with water and imprinting water with memory, and it goes everything from plants, minerals, gold, mantra, we go quite wide on what we use within the brief to bring all these archetypal forces. So in this case, the rune, it was actually made for me. This rune was made for me by a friend of mine who specializes in rune stuff and Chinese medicine. So she carved these tablets in red clay and then baked them. So you carve the shape of the rune, and then so there's an actual indentation like in the rune. So if you imagine you're carving something into clay and it leaves an indentation. I mean, red clay has some ability to hold form, and then she soaked this for I think 3 days. So the water almost forms up around the rune. So if you imagine like a water flowing through a structure, it almost becomes that structure. So if it were to flow through a specific shape, you could almost like a sacred geometry shape or whatever. The water would then become that shape. The water is this it has this incredible ability to like bring out and express the shape that you put in there. Now often it's like herbs or minerals or plants, but there's no real difference with runes because it's just like these are archetypal forms and this is the form of the beginning aspect. So I think to move a bit away from the any religious anything rather, these were just it's an ancient technology. I mean it kind of goes back at least as old as like the Ayurvedic stuff, the Babylonian stuff. I think these all co-arose as technologies at that time, but they represent a very almost clinical approach to okay, well if we wanted all the verbs, the doings, the actions of the world, we would put them in this form. So anyway, okay, I digress, but it's quite a big subject. But so anyway, these runes are carved and then they're soaked in water. I then mix them with my triple version of gold, which is there's a liquid version, a burnt version, and a solid version, and that kind of activates them, brings them to life, and allows the conversation to happen almost at the level of DNA to bring a message to our cells at the primordial level where thought and emotion arise, right? So this is where we're actually sending this message, and that's the technology around doing this. Now, of course, anyone could do this, but the mixing with the gold is kind of another level of this. It's just going a level deeper. People often use the runes for forecasting the future or doing like a reading on themselves, but this is using them as forces of nature or of reality to initiate a process. I realize this is quite out there, but it works, as you saw with your daughter. So
Yeah, and look, I mean, I'm quite familiar with radionics and energy medicine, frequency medicine. Like charging little sugar pellets or like little alcohol with frequency. And from Dr. Emoto's studies, Dr. Emoto did the study on water crystals. I sort of understood that you can change the shape of a water crystalline molecule just by the frequency or vibration or environment, that the water is in. And he did amazing research and studies and actually noted how the crystals would actually change based on different vibrations.
and then photograph them. Yeah. So this is working. Yeah, this is working with that. That's exactly what this is. I mean, the nice thing about his work is it brought a lot of that water technology to the fore, and people could say, they would put like love on a bottle, they'd write it on a bottle, and then they'd leave the water in there, and then they would pour it on a plant, and the plant would flourish. And then they would think crazy thoughts or shout abuse at the bottle with the water, or put hate on the bottle, and they'd pour the same water onto another plant, and the plant would die. So it's a clear, I mean, for me, this came as no surprise. It was just nice to have that research so someone else could like show this as like, okay, well, water is this imprintable medium, and I work with distilled water, which is empty water. So it's like water without all the minerals. So it's hungry water. Think of it like hungry water. It's like a sponge. So if you put in there, it's going to grab because it's been stripped of um its messaging. So then it's ready and ripe to be imprinted, and you just put whatever you put in there, it'll absorb. Um, then, I mean, there's obviously I do other bits and pieces with the water once I've made it to strengthen it and play with it and tonify it a bit. But this is the basis of the technology, and it's the basis of what homeopathy is based on, is the bringing a substance through either grinding or succussion to higher levels of potency. And I mean, there's been, I mean, like in India, there's like 1,000 homeopathic hospitals. It's massive there. It's everywhere there. It's like for them, it's just it's as normal as as anything. So that's the technology that this is based on. What differentiates this a bit is the depth. Using the gold, I'm actually able to bring these messages and sort of deliver the message at a much deeper level than I was able to do before. I mean,
So I wanted to actually comment on that. So my wife actually works in the medical field, and she used to work for the NHLS, which is the National Health Laboratory Service. That's like the government, and they do a lot of science test labs, research, and all that stuff. Anyway, many, many years ago, she took me to her lab once, and she was doing a study using gold nanoparticles. And they would actually use gold nanoparticles as like the delivery mechanism. So they would attach the medicine or something to the gold. I think it's because it's very ionized, so you can attach a lot of different medicines to it. And then you can actually deliver it into a cell. And she actually showed me under a microscope because she was doing research with guinea pigs or something, and they would inject this gold nanoparticles with the medicine, and you could actually see inside the cell these little gold nanoparticles just sitting there after having delivered their medicine. And she was researching like if the gold was going to harm the cells, does it go into the nucleus of the cells, what does it actually do? That was her research. But I found it so fascinating that you could actually see these little gold nanoparticles inside the cell of this guinea pig. And I don't know, is it something similar to how your technology is working or not really?
Um, no, it shows the power of gold. But I'm working on the submolecular level. I'm not delivering it into cells. I'm delivering it to, I think of it like this. Um, when we have a thought or an emotion, right? It arises in our head, and then if you were to track it, like maybe a nanosecond or two later, the biochemistry would begin to fire, and then you'd have serotonin, dopamine, noradrenaline, whatever would happen, you could actually track the movement of the emotion as a biochemical chain moving through the body, and you could track that. But before there's a biochemical cascade, there's something that arises. Now, I mean, this is the subject of who knows, existential philosophy and religion, and like where does stuff arise initially, but there's definitely a point before the biochemistry starts happening. So that's where I'm working at the level before the biochemistry, so that it actually informs the biochemistry about what to do. I'm not trying to say, okay, we're going to push the biochemistry around. So it's just like a level deeper. But what I've definitely found is, like, the deeper you go into the mind, the more foundational it is, and the more then it ripples up. If we're trying to do it from the top down, we're trying to fiddle at the top down level, but not the foundational level, then we're always trying to move it around, and it's pushing back against that, and we have to almost like have a little fight with it, because it'll do something, then the opposite will happen. But if we just deliver a directive, like imagine you were able to deliver a directive to someone where on a core level they were able to feel, you just delivered the feeling of love, right? And then you would see the serotonin and the dopamine all lighting up, the oxytocin, you would see that. But this is the level I'm dealing with here, at the level of thought and emotion arising.
Yeah, that's amazing.
I mean, I hope that's clear. It's pretty far out there, but it works. I mean, I've done multiple trials on multiple things with this gold technology, and I'm getting radical results. Even with, autism, we've seen 50% improvement in autistic kids. With my full spectrum protocol, which is using this gold technology. And it's interesting. This whole Genesis trial came out of that trial because I realized that 80% of people on the autistic spectrum have ADHD. So it's like, okay, well, I have to address this. I mean, there are people who are not obviously on the spectrum who have ADHD or have trouble focusing, concentrating, and I think we're all prone to, there's a rare human that's not, potentially caught in the cell phone every now and then, like, oh, you get caught and then you're watching some random stuff about random stuff. I don't think there's a human alive who's not kind of guilty of that to some extent. Now, in some cases, it's just more like a minor distraction, but in some cases, it's almost pathological. People, they get caught in, 2 hours later, they come out, and like you see these kids, and they completely, and adults are completely trapped in this. And it's such a powerful vector at trapping the attention. Um, and one of the effects of this genesis was, a major diminishment in doom scrolling. Interestingly enough, people actually mentioned it a number of times because they all acknowledged it as a problem, and for the ADHD mindset, even worse, because it's so easy to get distracted, and there's a major distraction easily available 24/7. I mean, back in the day, I mean, I'm 57 now. Back in the day, when I was growing up, we didn't have this. We didn't have all these easy distractions. There was like TV1, maybe TV2 from like 6 till 8 o'clock, and then it would change to Afrikaans. So, I mean, there wasn't that much media out there. You get a newspaper, you have to read books, but now it's all here. It's just instant access to the whole world, and the potential for us to get caught in that and not do what we have to do, like schoolwork with your daughter or the stuff of the world, I mean, it's just gone exponential. But I think we got like 70% improvement in doom scrolling. I mean, when I say that, I mean getting caught in doom scrolling. um, and that was noticeable because it meant that people could engage with a thought. A thought could arise, they could focus on it, they could bring it to completion, and then move on to the next thing. A lot of people were talking about their checklists, and they were like just ticking off their checklist, and they were getting things done. So they didn't have this massive backlog of hundreds of things that hadn't been done. And that in itself being an oppressive thing, like, almost paralyzed by too much to do because there's so many things that they should have done last week or the week before or last year or whatever. And there's just this massive backlog. And then they just go into like, okay, I'd rather just grab my phone and just focus on that. So, people were checking off their checklists, and the one woman that said she actually had more time because she got everything done, and then she had legitimate free time because she'd done everything to do. Then she could actually relax and whatever, watch movies or doom scroll with a clear conscience, in a sense, which was quite amusing in itself. But this is where we are. So to create medicines for this time and this age is obviously important. Do you have a question?
Yeah. So let's go back to those ingredients. So you mentioned that first ingredient was this Norse goddess, and you used the energy, and then you had the other three or four ingredients.
Okay, let me go through the ingredients. Okay, so the second ingredient, also within the Norse thing, is the ice rune. Right now, the ice rune is just the rune that slows everything down. I mean, I have a sleep formula where I use the ice rune as well because often people just need to be slowed down. But I put this ice rune in there because what I saw in the ADHD mindset was just, they were just going too fast a lot of the time. There was just too much going on. And as a result of that, that it's like you're running around, you can't focus on one thing. So I put this in there just to slow them down so they could actually like take a moment to be in the moment to do whatever they needed to do, which was obviously what they needed to do. So that was the second ingredient. But then I didn't want them too slow. So I put in the sun rune, the sun rune, which is all about expansion. So I wanted them to be slowed down to the point they could focus, and then expanded. So that's what the Suela did, the sun rune, just to expand them into possibilities. But it was important to have this, kind of ice fire, which represents slowing down and speeding up, but like a good balance between the two. I mean, when you look at this world, we exist between ice and fire. It's like there's the sun and then there's the cold, and somehow in between we exist in this little narrow biosphere with water where we have life. But if it gets too hot, we die. If it gets too cold, we die. But so it's always this dance between fire and ice. We're kind of these are the twin poles we actually that determine our existence. When it gets too hot, we conk out. When it gets too cold, stuff stops happening. So there's that. So ice and fire, and then the Raidu rune. The Raidu is around completion. The Raidu, the feeling of Raidu is arriving home after a day's work. You open the door knowing the job is done. You've done everything for the day, and you're kind of finished. You're going home. That sense of completion. So this was really the final thing. So we have something to initiate, something to slow down, center, but expand us, and then something to allow the completion of the task. Because this is very important in the ADHD mindset. Is like getting started. If they could, when they could get started, if they could get started, holding the attention for long enough on the activity to bring it to completion, which was a big problem with a lot of the mindset. So a lot of these people were having trouble completing stuff, and they'd have 50 things half done, and they'd like projects opened here or things opened there. And what we saw from the trial was um, a lot of completion, a lot of completion of tasks, and a lot of pleasure in completion. They actually look forward to completing, initiating, and completing a task, because then the sense, they would get the sense of relief. They would get the dopamine hit from like, oh wow, I've completed a task, without having to go through the whole adrenaline, cortisol. I'm going to die if I don't do this, or I'm forcing myself to do this. It's a danger, it's a threat. I'm going to do this. And then they'd kind of get the dopamine hit at the end, but it would be offset by the fact that their body was flooded with adrenaline and cortisol. So it's like, just bringing people back to a more healthy expression of what it is to do things. Like, I mean, I don't have ADHD, and I dive into stuff, I complete it. I actually take pleasure in like how quickly I can pay a bill when someone sends me a bill. It's like, okay, how quickly can I pay it, just to surprise this person? Like, oh wow, he paid fast. I send it in like 30 seconds later, he's paid it. So, but that's because I don't like anything on my plate. I don't like anything here sitting on like, oh, I haven't done this and all this backlog of stuff. If I can get off my plate, then I have a nice clean inbox. Stuff comes in, I get it out, I get it done. So which for me is the sane, healthy way of doing it, because it means your mind is clear. You don't have to worry about anything. I mean, we also have to realize that certain things we can't do that with, and that's part of the learning as well. But that we have to hold certain things, but whatever you can get off your plate, to get off your plate. Because if you were to imagine these ADD people, at their plate, it would just be piled with meat and vegetables and drinks and and on that toss, and like it would just be like a thing spilling off the table onto the floor, and then they try to put today's meal there, and it's like they can't even fit. They've got to push something else off, but they've got to haven't addressed that. So from a mental hygiene point of view, it's just a much better way to run your mind. And this is what people saw. They ticked off all these activities. Okay, then was the fourth ingredient, or the fifth ingredient was Amanita fulva. It's an edible mushroom, but when you potentize it, when you amplify the frequency, it has some fairly unusual effects. It has a cousin, Amanita muscaria, the red one with the white dots. It's not that one, but it has, once it's potentized, it has similar effects to that, but without any of the poisonous aspects the other one has. But when you looked at the longhouses in Sweden and Norway back in the day, they used to use that other one to. They would eat this mushroom, and it would give them total focus, so they could focus in the long winter's night on doing repetitive tasks. So it was that feeling of being like, okay, now I have to stitch this blanket or weave this cloth or carve this activity. It's dark outside for the next 3-4 months. I can't go outside. It's freezing. It's cold. I've got whatever food to eat here, some reindeer, and I'm stuck inside this longhouse with all my other family and friends and whatever the village. And I just have to find a way to be able to focus without getting distracted on this one task, without, even though it's boring, right, without distraction, because this is where I need to be. It's interesting, what came out of that. I mean, the flip side of that is, Asperger's syndrome, which is kind of this monofocus. You see, like, Elon Musk's a bit Asperger's. It's like without emotions, he just focuses and focuses. I mean, there are ups and downs, but this came out of a lot of the Norwegian sort of Scandinavian folk. They had this as like almost like too much focus. So, but this is not the problem of the ADHD group. They're like, their focus is like, it's like butterflies flying in all direction, whereas the Asperger's people have a different problem. They're like almost too focused to the exclusion of all else. So what we're trying to do here is trying to bring some of that kind of technology, that kind of just total intensive focus. And I use this remedy myself when I need to do some repetitive, boring tasks that I actually don't want to do, like manufacturing. It's like quite tedious and boring, but I've got to do it. And I don't want to be distracted. I don't want to be like, I'd rather be, okay, I get up and make a cup of tea, or like check my phone, or I've just got to knuckle down and do it. So I take this particular substance when I do that. And what happens is, like, you go in and you're totally caught in it, and then it gets done, and then you come out, it's like, oh wow, it's finished. So it's actually, you're almost surprised at yourself when you finish with it, because that capacity to feel boredom and to feel distraction is not really happening at that time. And that's what we want. So I mean, obviously this would be amazing for studying, for students, for studying, for homework, for people who have to do repetitive tasks which don't require much intelligence but just have to be done again and again and again, and the mind is kind of rebelling against that. And a lot of the kind of admin of life is sort of in this category, like the you got to clean the house or wash the dishes, or do admin for licensing cars, or whatever your worst thing is, doing your taxes, repetitive activities which are, you don't really want to do, but you have to do, but you're really pushing back against it. When you take this Genesis, you almost just get into it, and then you're like totally involved with it, and then you come out of it, right? Okay, so there's those ingredients, and then I put in two of my other remedies that are part of my other range, creation and golden spiral. Now, creation is a whole mixture in itself, but when I designed creation, I designed it around the idea of like best day ever. Like, what does my best day ever look like? So let's reverse engineer the best day ever and say, okay, so I want to be open, I want to be expanded, I want to be engaged with the world, I want to be a little bit playful because it's a good space to be in, and I want to be cheerful. So with various different substances, I've created this remedy. Even the light of Jupiter's in there, which puts you in this slightly celebratory space. So when I started taking creation, I noticed I became a better person. Right? I would engage with the woman at Woolies, who's packing my bag. It's like, hey, how are you? Before, I never used to do that. I'd be in my own head. Or the gas station guy, he's putting petrol in my car. I'd like start chatting to him, like, hey, blah, blah, blah. I never used to do that. So just allowed the actual engagement with the world to become more natural and easier. So that went into Genesis because I wanted people to feel at their best, when they're taking this. It's like they're feeling optimistic and like, okay, I'm greeting the day, not like the normal, like chug down some coffee and like, get into the day and hopefully it goes all right. That strikes me once again as almost like slightly haphazard technology. I mean, I also like coffee. I mean, there's nothing wrong with coffee. It's just more forcing your nervous system to the point where it can engage, and you might be out, but you're not necessarily in your best state. You're not necessarily in the happy, optimistic state you might want to be. which is where we really need to be for optimal functionality. Then we reach out and we engage with people more. Okay, and then the final thing before we get on to the results of the actual trial, the final ingredient is the golden spiral. Now, we're talking about Dr. Emoto's work about imprinting water. So with the golden spiral, they made the golden spiral is the Fibonacci sequence. It's like seen in sunflowers, and the ear and the bones of the hand and the uterus. It's everywhere. It's in stars. It's in galaxies. It's in seashells. I mean, wherever you look, it's this perfect ratio in reality. And so what happened with this is they passed some light through a sculpture built on this ratio, and then the light fell through into the water. So basically, it imprinted the golden ratio into the water, and then they then made a remedy, and then I took the remedy and amplified that, and that's the golden spiral remedy. So what I wanted to do with that was just to give people, just to return them to their more perfect version of their expression, which we're all expressing anyway. But the closer we are to the golden ratio in ourselves, the healthier the body is. They say, like, if they see a face and it's closer to the golden ratio, we'll find it more pleasing. Or architecture, even the ancient Greeks built on this ratio. If we see something closer to this ratio, we're more likely to find it appealing. So when we take the golden spiral, it's telling the body, okay, express yourself at this level of this perfect ratio. So basically what I've done with Genesis is I've kind of stacked all the good stuff, right, that I could think of from that side, and then I've put the beginning, middle, end stuff, and then I've given the focus, and then I've slowed them down a bit because the 95% of the ADHD people are going too fast. This is when you see them, they're like, no, 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 and they're all over the place. So it's just like, if they can just slow down a little bit, then they can actually begin to engage. But they still need to be open. That's the sun rune.
So this is amazing. I really like the explanation because I'm very familiar with actually making a custom remedy. With the radionics, you would like look at a client and say, well, what do I add? Do I add this blood remedy and maybe I help the liver as well and give this other remedy? So you actually make a custom remedy for a client based on their issues or their help that they need. And there's a lot of thought that goes into, just throwing random things in. You're like really trying to understand holistically the issue you're trying to solve and giving the remedies to support the different organs. But you're doing exactly the same now at the mental stage for an ADHD person. And I love the thought pattern and the attention to detail and how you've gone and built this remedy up, because it's like getting the person to start the task, then the ice to get them to calm down and slow down, and the fire to expand. I mean, it's like so well thought out. The balance seems to be right, that you've come with the right balance between everything. And yeah, I mean, I've got a lot of appreciation because I've made a lot of custom remedies, so it's a real special skill, and I'm just amazed to see a real artist, cooking up, or a real chef cooking up this amazing remedy. So let's get into the trial, because that was an amazing experience. I myself also took part of the trial, and my daughter. But let's talk about the trial that you actually did. I think you had, maybe 50 people and some amazing results that came out of it.
I had 30 people, and we ran the trial over 2 months. So the what we were tracking were the vectors around, like, okay, how easy is it to start a task? So we'd measure a pre and post, like a pre, during, and post. And what we found with this was, like, on average, like 70% improvement in the ease of starting a task. Then we looked at the vector of, or the navigating bar of staying with a task, actually getting stuck into the task, and there was like a 65% improvement in that. Then we look at the vectors of, like, doom scrolling. Were people, and it was just an example of a potential distractor, something that might distract us from whatever we were focusing on. I mean, doom scrolling is very kind of pertinent, but it could just as easily be making a cup of tea or petting the cat or who knows people's levels of distraction and what they choose to, the mind chooses to drag them away from the task. And once again, we got like 78% on this ability to focus on a task and not be distracted. There was. I mean, I'll just look at the results here because I haven't memorized them all. And by the way, this is all. If you go to beyondmedicine.coza and you go to the trial results, you can pull this all up. It's all done in graphs and whatnot. It's like, and I'm not going to bore you with all the details because it's like 3 or 4 pages of graphs. But you know, on the whole, it was like between 65 and 80% improvement in most of the vectors. It's like, so for example, before Genesis, people had a task initiation level of 39%, and then it was like after Genesis they had like 75%. So like you saw these marked improvements in their ability to begin stuff. There was focus and attention rating was 33, and then moved to 77. We had mood and emotional balance. We had a 69% improvement in mood and emotional balance. So we saw more emotional regulation here, people more able to regulate their moods, which is obviously a huge part of it, because if people are all over the show mood-wise, then that'll stop them from initiating a task because they're just in a bad mood and they won't do it just because they're just being difficult with themselves. I mean, if they say you're your own worst enemy. That statement, I think, really applies to the ADHD people, and they know it, but they can't stop it. They can't help it. They know what they need to do, and they know what they should be doing. But part of the nature of the brain and the wiring of the biochemistry is they just get distracted, and they get bounced around to all these different spaces. So it was so nice to see improvement on these things where, stuff where they were kind of really struggling. So then we have distraction. We had 64% improvement. We had task completion went from 46% to 79%. We had emotional regulation, I said, went up like 20%. Sleep quality, there were 1 or 2 people who had difficulty sleeping, but a lot of people had better sleep. So it was quite confusing as to what was going on there. And if people find that they're one of the people who has trouble sleeping with it, then maybe this product is not for you. But it was like literally 5%. But then conversely, I had a lot of people who slept a lot better. So it was slightly confusing, this vector, but this was the only vector where there was like even a slightly wasn't a resounding positive improvement, but where the people did sleep better, they slept much better. So that was a little bit confusing, but I didn't want to tweak the formula, and I tried tweaking it to like deal with the people who are having sleep stuff, and it didn't really affect it. So I'm not sure. Maybe it was a conglomeration. And once you start taking stuff out of a formula, you alter its fundamental structure. And I thought, on the whole, more people, a lot more, like 70% more people had better sleep. So, the 5 or 10% who had, sleep stuff, they might take it like once every second or third day or whatever, just to give that focus and concentration. But, as I said, I didn't want to mess with it because we had more people having improved sleep. We had how likely were people to recommend Genesis to others? And it's like 85% of people said they were likely to recommend it to other people. Continue using Genesis, we had 70% said they would continue using it. Because, what was interesting with this remedy is that people saw ongoing continuous effects. So they would stop taking it and the effects would continue to manifest, to roll over. They would have better concentration going forward. In fact, I had one woman who took like 1 or 2 bottles, and she said her concentration is permanently improved now. Her focus is permanently improved. So it's almost like one was able to layer it to such an extent that we could set a new directive in place for the arising of thought and emotions, so that a permanent alteration occurred, which meant that they no longer needed to take it, which obviously from a selling product point of view is not the best, but like, that's fine. If I can sell 1 million bottles of that's fine. I'm more than happy with that, but obviously some people will need to take more of it, and at certain times they'll need to take more of it, like exams or I mean, this time of year is very wow. I'd forgotten how busy November gets. Oh, I actually think we should have 2 Novembers the way November runs. It's just like so much happening and events and office parties and school closing. It's just crazy. But, so I mean, at times of greater need, I would suggest people might use this more frequently because it really helps us to focus on what needs to be done. Okay, so just coming back to results. We had 72% improvement in mental organization after taking Genesis. We have 72% in starting tasks, improvement in starting tasks. Then 69% improvement in completing tasks they'd postponed for a long time. Focus lasted longer without mental fatigue. We had 75% on that. So, like when they took it, their ability not to get tired while doing the task was 75% improved. And obviously this is a huge part of it. And obviously with exams, this would be amazing for studying for exams for students, because then they would actually be able to hold the attention for longer without getting distracted. So it's not just the attention, is holding it for longer. There was even some of the trial stuff around, like, some of the people would experience the effects after like 5-10 minutes. Some would have experiencing them after half an hour. Some would experience them after an hour. And it was an even breakdown. But like I would say, probably 40% would experience it after 5 to 10 minutes after taking, and then the rest, for most of them were like 15 to 30 minutes after, and then a few would be an hour later. But this just shows um, the personality types, the constitutions, if you like. I mean, if you've done some homeopathy, you're familiar with the constitution. Certain constitutions are more electric than others, so they'll respond more quickly. They're like a tuning fork. They'll pick up the vibration more quickly. So, and this is what we see with vibrational medicine generally, is that people are more will respond quicker and some slower. Obviously, if people are on medication, that's like either psychiatric or stuff for ADHD, that will tend to alter the results, and it'll be harder to see because they've got another layer that we're trying to get through, and then the results become less clear. But a lot of the people were happy to stop whatever they were on, and even to the extent of like diminishing how much coffee they would have, just to use that as a stimulant to get them into this, or like maybe tone down on the Ritalin a bit, just to and I mean, Ritalin has effects as well. People lose weight. It's not really the best thing to give for people, but people have no choice. They need to focus. They need to concentrate, and often the teachers bring it to everyone's attention. Like, okay, look, this child won't sit still in class. They're fiddling. They're playing with everything. They're disturbing everyone. So the teachers kind of force the parents to put the child on something so that they're not a distraction to themselves, the teacher and themselves, and then the rest of the classmates. So, this is not just obviously for children. I mean, a lot of the people on the trial were like mid-20s, mid-30s, mid-40s, mid-50s even. We had the complete range from childhood stuff to adults and everything in between, just to see if there was a difference in how this would apply to different people. What we saw with older people is like often their compensatory mechanisms were more finely developed or acutely developed, because they'd worked out how to run their system and they knew they could do this and that. But it's like they're all, every day they would wake up to fight the tiger, as opposed to like, okay, I can just take this and I can be focused. Every day they'd have to kind of tweak their mind with the right amount of like coffee or L-theanine or exercise. It would be a cocktail, a different cocktail for everyone, and sometimes they would win, but often they wouldn't, and they would just be fighting this losing battle, and like, well, there's this to-do list just stretching into the sunset every day. And this was, they were able to tick off their to-do list and then actually get ahead of themselves, so they actually have some guilt-free free time to themselves when they weren't just completely overwhelmed by what they had to do. And obviously, the idea of like dopamine as a biochemical is like, it's a reward, right? So we do something, we get a dopamine rush. Oh, that feels good. And so they would get pleasure out of completing the tasks, which is the way it should be, instead of like that being offset by this whole other biochemical cascade nightmare of fear and terror just driving them into this state. So they would return to a more normal, response relationship with the world, which is obviously what we want. Okay, continuing on. Okay. Focus lasted longer without mental fatigue, 75%. I felt less anxious and overstimulated. We had 71% improvement in that. I mean, this is obviously, you can actually break down the individual components of the remedy and what's doing what. This was like clearly the ice rune working, ice on the sun rune. It's like, okay, slowing them down enough. And then as a result of that, not going into this agitation where they would need to kind of run around and do all these things. Less distracted by social media. There we go. Doom scrolling. There we go. It was a 64% improvement in that. So that meant they were less likely to get caught in the activity of the doom scrolling. And if they were caught in the doom scrolling, they were more likely to be able to extract themselves in a shorter period of time. So this was a double figure. It was like less initial grabbing into social media, and then secondly, more ability to self-regulate and to move themselves out of the social media space and back on task. So I mean, this was obviously really important. Mood and mental balance improvement, 69% improvement. Then I had experienced greater clarity and flow, 71% improvement. Focus and attention before Genesis, 38%. After Genesis, 77%. Task initiation before Genesis, 39%. After Genesis, 75%. Task completion, that's task initiation before and after, 33, 39, and 75. Task completion before Genesis, 46, going up to 79%. Emotional regulation, 53% before, after, 76%. Sleep quality was kind of the same. How likely to continue taking Genesis, 71%. And how likely are you to recommend Genesis to others, 85%. And then there were a couple of vectors around how consistently did you take Genesis, and there was like daily versus ultimate days. There's like, how long does it take for you to feel the Genesis? 7 of the people had less than 15 minutes. 11 people had 15 to 30 minutes. And then the rest were a bit unsure, or like after an hour were 11. So that varied. That's what I was talking about. And you can't say with any certainty how people are going to respond to this, because their constitutions are different and the factors affecting them. We saw with some of the people who were really overloaded, the people who were like, their house was a complete mess and they were just kids and whatever, and they were just basically in shutdown. They were in kind of collapse. What came out of a lot of these people was they would slowly begin to throw stuff out, junk out. The dishes wouldn't be this horrible nightmare. They'd get to the dishes, they'd wash the dishes, they'd clear that off. So they would begin to take steps to move themselves out of this complete overwhelm, where even starting anything was a nightmare. And they would take steps. So obviously the further down that slope they were, the longer it took for them to get back. And the higher up the slope, the more quickly they were able to notice improvement. But everyone noticed improvement. But there were some people who were really quite badly affected there. I mean, I had a chat with 1 or 2 of them, and I could just hear the chaos in the background, and they were on video, and their house was just a complete nightmare. Kids, dishes, dogs, and there was just their ability to do it and focus on the first thing to begin with, that wasn't there. And they were just in shutdown, overwhelm, and it was just getting worse. So for them, it was like, okay, well, do the dishes, throw out all the stuff you haven't, like clean the house, or if you can't clean the house, get a cleaner in, clean the house, and then they could begin to this process of moving back up the chain towards organization. And then they got to the point where they would get through the to-do list, and then they would wake up each morning almost like with a clean slate, and they would know that like they could have like 8 hours uninterrupted focus on a task without distraction, and that meant that yeah, they were going to have a good day, and it wasn't going to be a complete nightmare. So this in essence to bring hope to people in a sphere where people um, didn't necessarily have hope, and to give them the, if you like, the skills, the energetic skills required to bring something from inception to initiation to progression to completion, um, while putting them in the mood where it felt like this was something they were enjoying doing and this was a fun thing. This was the real pleasure watching this whole trial play out, because I mean, as I said, when I started this, I wasn't aware of how much. I mean, I've got a friend who's ADD, and I knew he would be like, no, no, you get distracted easily, and I thought, well, that's just his quirk, that's just his thing, right? But then on talking to him, once I'd done this, realizing, wow, how you know, you have to chase your psyche around the room like this kind of rabbit that's just running around just to get anything done, and you have to set in place all these complicated, almost like scenario traps for yourself to almost like force your attention if possible, whether it's stimulants or um like I knew this one guy who um he had so little control over his ice cream addiction that he would have like a fridge, but he would lock the fridge or lock the freezer with a time lock, so he couldn't access the ice cream because he couldn't actually. So he'd lock the ice cream in the fridge, and then only after a certain amount of time would he be able to get to because he knew he wouldn't have control of himself in that time. And if he got to the freezer, he'd eat all the ice cream and be bloated, like fat on the floor. So I mean, these are the kind of crazy situational stuff that people resort to in order to corral their brain to the point where they can actually function normally. And I use normally in deep inverted commas because I think what I've learned from the whole neurodivergent thing is, like, ADD is considered neurodivergent, as is Asperger's, but a lot of Asperger's are really high functional, like Elon Musk is Asperger's. So it's like it didn't stop him from making 500 billion. So it's like it's not necessarily a bad thing. It just means certain aspects of your psyche are, in a sense, overdeveloped, and certain other aspects, like maybe the empathy, is like underdeveloped, or the emotional stuff, the reading the room. But I mean, we all make trade-offs. If we were to imagine what we wanted, we'd say, okay, I want strength, I want dexterity, I want charisma. But you can't have everything, right? So you choose your list of what you might want, and then deal with it. And whether where this whole plague of ADHD came from. I mean, that's another thing entirely, and I don't think it's really worth getting into, because as much research as you might find that it was XYZ, you'd find equal amounts of research saying it's not. And yes, I do believe that the dietary stuff, if people clean up their diet, they have better focus and attention. But often it's part of the ADHD mindset that they'll, crave things which are bad for them, or that are bouncing their head all over the show anyway, and they'll choose bad food choices because it's part of the mindset. And I don't know if you've ever tried to. I mean, when I started out in the early days, I was working. Nutrition was part of my course, in Australia, and I would treat people. We would have to treat and recommend stuff for them nutritionally, and I would watch them, and I could see that they were lying to me about what they'd eaten. And I'm trying to get them to do it, and like they would come back and they want to keep me happy and say, yes, I ate the fruit or whatever. But you could see they're lying. And I thought, I don't want to be the person to have to try force them into doing it, if it's even possible, because it's their life. But if I'm just the person bringing them this remedy, which can actually make their life easier, and then they can, make the right food choices. I mean, with your daughter, like trying to get them to eat the right food, it's like it's a headache, And I don't want to be the policeman. I don't want to be the person saying you must eat this. And we do know that, like, preservatives and like colorants and like all the junk food is going to make these ADHD symptoms worse. But this is not somewhere we can often intervene because it's case by case. But with this remedy, we can create the best environment possible for them to have the most optimal experience of focus and concentration, completion and finishing a task possible. And then just like, here, take it, ingest it, become that, and then go out and do that, and then work with your scenarios, your circumstances um, to bring that into form. And we got beautiful results with this. It was very heartening. I wasn't quite sure what was going to happen when I did this trial. I mean, as you said before, this is art. I see myself as this energetic sculptor, and I'm literally putting these pieces together of this. I mean, as design parameters, I use artistry, beauty, power, gentleness. These are my four pillars that I design according to. So each of these must be represented, because it's one thing making something very powerful, but if it's not gentle, it's going to create like all sorts of disturbances in the field. And it's one thing making it gentle, but if it's not powerful, people will forget about it because it's not efficacious enough. So to simultaneously have power and gentleness as twin poles, and then the actual artistry and the beauty, like when I'm creating these things, it's like I see this beautiful form coming into form, and I'm almost just tweaking everything to create this, to present this like kind of masterpiece, which is like, here's my work of art, but it's an energetic work of art, which if you ingest, it'll put you in a better position to bring about what you want to bring about, whether it's sleep, or with the full spectrum protocol for autism, or there's Genesis, the ADD. I've got one called Satori, which is good for completing tasks, which just has this Raidu one, which is great for businessmen. I've got a new remedy called Closure, which deals with the old memory, but that's another whole conversation. We could do another whole one on that. But this is the whole concept of beyond medicine is like, okay, well, let's look at the underlying forces, and let's try to really address that, so people can make deep structural changes which can percolate up into their body and their mind, and they can actually have a better experience of being themselves and sort of do what they actually want to do, not just to be fighting all these lions and tigers and bears all the time in their mind, of like having to wake up and fight their mind just to get anything done. That depresses me.
That is absolutely amazing. The results, I am going to leave a link below the video so you can go see the results on Dr. Suzman's page. It is called beyondmedicine.co.za, but you can go find the results there. But follow the link and you will actually be mesmerized by how everything has just improved. It went from 30 to 70 almost across the board. The only one that was a bit unsure was the sleep one. And for myself, I was also not sure. Did I sleep better? Well, I always slept really well. So, maybe it was a difficult one to get clarity on, but everything else, task completion, focus, attention, doom scrolling. I mean, across the board, the results are not even debatable. There was just such a huge, huge, massive improvement. I was amazed, and it's good to see that you were even pleasantly surprised. I think more surprised at how good the results were. So it is so wonderful to see that if there is any symptoms of ADHD, I mean, in my daughter's case, I didn't know she had ADHD. She was definitely not diagnosed as ADHD, but I saw such tremendous improvement in her attention and focus and getting her homework done, as an example. Maybe she was ADHD and we just didn't know it. And thank goodness I did not go and put her on Ritalin or whatever else is out there on the market. This, yeah, this is a game changer. It really, really changed her life and our lives.
Well, what someone said to me, like, do they need to have an official diagnosis of ADHD in order to take this? And the answer is absolutely not. It's like some people go to the point of getting it diagnosed, and there's certain markers and you can check and whatever. But, what we're dealing with is poor focus, poor concentration, poor task initiation, poor completion. So if any of these things are problematic, then Genesis will benefit you. I mean, I targeted around ADHD because it was a particular group where these symptoms are most marked. And in some cases, I was amazed that these people were still alive. It was kind of like this kind of monkey that have been just being fed like 50 cups of coffee loose in their head, running around just throwing stuff everywhere. And like I was like, wow, how do these guys even function? I felt a great outpouring of empathy for this. It's like, geez, I'm so lucky I don't have that. This kind of mind which isn't working. And there's been a lot of research into like what's going on. And to be honest, brain neurochemistry is possibly one of the least well understood aspects in medicine. I mean, there's a lot of, when I was doing the trials for the autism, you know, it's even more challenging because there aren't even official characteristics there, and each person has slightly different manifestations of ASD or autism spectrum disorder. So, like some of them have food sensitivities, taste sensitivities, sound, light, aversion to public, aversion to demands. Some of them are ADD, some of them are like very involuted, some of them won't talk, some of them can't even go to the toilet by themselves. It's such a range. And, like a lot of people didn't want to, you know, have anything to do with that. And within this crew across the board, we got like almost 45-50% improvement, which is remarkable in itself. I mean, with this was kind of an easier one because in a sense the brain is less impacted. It's distracted, but people can still do the regular stuff. A lot of these kids, with the autistic spectrum stuff, they often couldn't even speak, or they hadn't spoken, or just normal tasks like dressing themselves they couldn't do. So we were dealing with a much more severely impacted group. But and that we got 50%, and this is down to this using this gold technology, which allows us to get right down to the level where thought and emotion arise. There's a movie called Inception. I don't know if you saw it, but it's about inserting into dreams. This Inception was around putting in an idea at the lowest possible level of the subconscious and the unconscious so that it percolates up into the consciousness. And that's really what this does.
Thank you, Adam. Yes, I do remember the movie Inception with Leonardo DiCaprio, and they would go into the person's subconscious mind, deep within the person's sort of dream state, into the subconscious to implant ideas, and that then surfaced up to their more conscious thought. It was a fascinating concept, and that's a great way to actually explain how your remedies are working, going to a deeper level at the sort of blueprint level of the body, and then surfacing upwards to affect the biochemistry of the body. Dr. Suzman, we really appreciate your time coming onto the show to explain this amazing remedy. Genesis is truly, truly well designed, carefully thought out, and really helps with attention, starting tasks, completing tasks, remaining calm and not getting frazzled and distracted. And I've seen such amazing results with my daughter and even in myself. Dr. Suzman, thank you so much. And guys, if you want to see the trial results or if you want to go check out the Beyond Medicine website, all links are below this video. So, till next time, ciao for now.